sponsored by Wisdom Windfall, a purpose management company. We are also sponsored by the White House Council on Boys and Men, the coalition to create that, the Mankind Project, USA, and the Global Initiative for Boys and Men, and these Boys to Men communities. Now I want to go and do a quick introduction of Jamie Metzl. Jamie is, first of all, a friend. I've known Jamie since I was 17 years old. He is a classmate of my wife, Richie, who's on this Zoom as well. Jamie is a Ph.D. author, futurist. He's a technology and healthcare futurist, geopolitical expert, a novelist, both science fiction as well as other amazing stories, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and the founder of OneShared.World. He serves on the World Health Organization's Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. And Jamie has served in the U.S. National Security Council, the State Department, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and as a human rights officer in the United Nations. He is a founder and co-chair for Partnership for a Secure America. He is a member on the Council on Foreign Relations and a former White House Fellow and Aspen Institute Crown Fellow. Jamie holds a Ph.D. from Oxford, a J.D. from Harvard Law School, and is magna cum laude Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Brown University. And he's a dear friend and someone who we've been following for a long time. Please welcome Dr. Jamie Metzl.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here with you and with everybody. And it just makes me incredibly happy to see your face, to see Richie and her amazing parents who I've known since my our youth in Kansas City, although everybody looks pretty much exactly the same. And I'm just really honored to be here with the Boys to Men community, because if there's one thing that probably all of us need to do wherever we are in our lives is just to grow up a little more. And the way that we grow up is by coming together in communities of people who inspire us, who challenge us to be our best. And that's, in my mind, that's what it's about. And especially now in times that are so challenging, that becomes even more important. I think so many of us are having multiple varied experiences that all feel kind of the same, maybe sitting in the exact same chair in front of the exact same screen, even if we have different virtual backdrops making it look like we're in amazing places, although you guys in Hawaii, you actually are. And yet it's in times like this that we really have to challenge ourselves to be more, to be better. I know certainly for me in the earliest days of the pandemic, that's what I told myself and told everybody around me, that this is going to be a long journey. It's going to be much longer than I think at that time most people appreciated. And at the end of this, one of the options is to sit home and binge watch Netflix and crawl out at some point when this passes, stronger, weaker, or we can do what your community is trying to do, to say, well, this is a challenge, and it's adversity that makes us stronger if we face that adversity, and if we are really thoughtful about what's it going to take in order to get through this crisis in a way that doesn't just handle this crisis, that learns from it. And our communities of people who inspire us to be our best are just such an essential part of that. And certainly we all miss physical communities. I know a little bit of the little Robert Bly drum circles and things like that. And I think everybody would love to be out being physical, but even virtual communities are so important, really a lifeline to so many of us. Michael asked me to talk a little bit about where we're going. I know the theme of your conversation is where we're coming from and where we're going. And those two things are just so intimately connected that I thought we might talk a little bit about those two topics together. And I guess, as always, to start in the present. All of our lives are on the verge of being transformed, at least out of this pandemic, through this incredible experience of these mRNA, messenger RNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. Really, the technical name is synthetic messenger RNA vaccine. So why do I want to start this conversation there? Because what's happening when we all will get injected with these vaccines is very different from what happened with the polio vaccine, with these earlier generations of vaccines that were attenuated viruses. So you get the virus, you change it a little bit, and then you infect the people, you get the immunological response without being harmed by the virus. What we're doing with this synthetic messenger RNA vaccine is we are synthetically creating a set of instructions to your cells for how to create a protein, one protein that triggers an immunological response from your body, and that body creates, and your body creates the immunity. And so rather than having to build manufacturing plants to create this immunity, what we're doing is turning everybody's body into an individual manufacturing plant of creating your own immunity. And it's magic. And certainly when I talk a lot about the future of biology and all of the work that I've been doing, Michael mentioned, I'm a member of the World Health Organization International Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. My book, Hacking Darwin, is all about this, that we're on the verge of this fundamental transformation, not just in the way we do healthcare, because of all of the tools of the genetics and biotech revolution. We're going to move from our world of generalized medicine based on population averages to personalized or precision medicine based on each person's individual biology. But then with all of the sequencing and other forms of gaining more information, and the bioinformatics and analytics allowing us to make sense of these mountains of data, we're going to be entering a new phase of not just generalized or precision medicine, but of predictive medicine, healthcare, health, and life. And that's going to allow us to think quite differently about our lives, about our set of our range of capabilities and risks, and how we want to interact not just with healthcare, but with all sorts of things. And certainly in the work that I'm doing with the World Health Organization, the big question that we're asking ourselves is, how do we make sure that these incredibly powerful, godlike technologies can be used wisely? Our committee was created in the immediate aftermath of the announcement in late 2018 of the birth of the first two, and then there was later a third, genetically engineered CRISPR babies in China. And it was clear to everybody, including Dr. Tedros Adhanom, the WHO Director General, that this was a big deal, that we were beginning a process of rewriting the code of life, and we needed to make sure that this wasn't done willy-nilly or irresponsibly, or maybe even at all. And so our committee has been meeting very, very aggressively, and we're going to be coming out with our report in early March, making recommendations for how perhaps one of the most powerful technologies in all of human history can be governed in a way that maximizes its benefits and minimizes its harm. And
Wow.
that's what I was thinking a lot about early this year, and was traveling all around the world and speaking and meeting with health ministers and others. And then I was invited, I'm on faculty of Singularity University, which is kind of like a university of the future, founded by Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil and some other people like that. So in the earliest days of the pandemic, I was invited to speak at the Singularity COVID Summit on whether the tools of the genetics revolution were a match for COVID-19. And my view then is that they were, and I think now we're seeing that they are. But that morning, I woke up with a little bit of a strange feeling that I wasn't supposed to give that talk, because I'd been giving a lot of thought to the question, well, how do we govern the responsible use of these incredible tools of human genetic engineering? And I realized, well, there's a problem because we need to have some kind of global system, But we don't have that. That's just not the way that our world is organized. And that's why we were able to have this kind of rogue science in China. That's why that we just don't have, even to this day, a governance infrastructure for that technology. But then as someone who was pretty intimately involved with the WHO, I asked the question, well, why is it that we weren't prepared for COVID? And certainly there were some big questions about that were much bigger than the issue of genetics. As a matter of fact, they were so big that morning I woke up and I realized this wasn't the talk that I needed to give. The talk that I felt I needed to give was about why weren't we prepared for COVID? And when I thought through that very quickly in the course of that day before that talk, that was connected to the question of why aren't we prepared for really any major pandemic? And when I thought through that, that connected me to the question of why can't we respond adequately to climate change or ecosystem destruction or proliferating weapons of mass destructions or global systemic poverty and inequality, and really pretty much any major shared global challenge, whatever it is, you can pretty much bet that we don't have an adequate means of responding. And
including the challenges of that our youth are facing in an ever-changing political environment, economics, intercultural relations. I mean, the youth, at Boys to Men, youth is our future. So when you told me that you wanted to start this organization, I'm very, very, very excited to get involved and join the youth committee. Please keep going.
And what I will say is Michael was involved with all of this from the beginning. And Richie and Luz and Tony have been involved with pretty much everything that I've ever done for most of my life, since 8th grade, actually. But I completely agree. It's all of these sets of issues. My basic analysis is that our species went very rapidly in historic terms from a bunch of small groups of roving nomads to this global species with the ability to fundamentally transform or even end all of life on Earth. But while our forms of organization went from band of nomad to village to city to country, and then after 2 world wars to a little bit of international overlay through the UN and other bodies, we never really went beyond that. And that's why we have this fundamental mismatch between these global human-made problems and the absence of global solutions. And so in that first talk, what I said is, and there's an answer to this. We need to build a new global framework that reflects the realities of our world today. And what the virus has shown us is that we're all connected. I mean, the virus is the perfect metaphor and the manifestation of our connectivity. If this kind of virus had emerged, whatever, a few hundred years ago, yes, occasionally there were these big global pandemics, but even the earliest big global pandemics, like Black Plague, like smallpox, whatever, they were all connected to human mobility, and human mobility on a pretty large scale through ships and other things. So it's our connectivity that has created the opportunity for this relatively small outbreak, and obviously every outbreak is small in the beginning, to become this global scourge. And we had to do, in my mind, the analysis of what was the problem. And if that was the problem, that we have this world where we're all interconnected, but we don't have a framework for responding in that way, well, why is it? And the reason is, primary reason is we've organized ourselves into countries, and nobody is advocating for our collective needs as humans sharing the same planet. And so it's no surprise that our leaders, when they go and do what they do, they are doing, when they fight for our narrower national interests, often the expense of our collective global interests, they are doing the exact job that we hired them to do. And we can't criticize them for that, but we need to change the job description. And so in that early talk, what I said was the way that we're going to change it is we have to look at our national political models. If you want to change something, what do? You build a movement. That's what the civil rights movement was, the women's rights movement. You build a community around an idea, and then you use that community to together demand change. We could have all the global citizen rock concerts in the world. It's not going to change anything unless we organize. So to make a long story short, and Michael knows all of this because he's been an intimate part of it from the beginning. The video of that first talk went viral. 2 days later, I stayed up all night and I drafted what I called a declaration of global interdependence, put that out on my website. That went viral, and I called a global meeting on April 1st. We had 130 people from 25 countries, including Michael. We had former presidents, prime ministers. We had high school students, all people, everything in between. And as Michael said, we broke up into 8 different working groups. We redrafted the declaration. We divided up. We did all this work, and certainly engaging young people was at the center of this from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, we have had and still have hundreds of young people who are working something close to full time in order to build this movement. And it's been really an incredible journey from then to now. So we launched 35 days later, after maybe 10,000 volunteer hours. After that April 1st, on May 6th, we launched the organization. We're now a community of people in 112 countries working together. We had 1.2 million people at our Global Interdependence Summit, where the Dalai Lama spoke, Renee Fleming performed. We have, as I mentioned, and it's just an incredible team of young people who are really, it's a youth-led organization, but what I say, it's a flat organization. I mean, we have people in there, somebody who's 89 who's been very actively involved, but the young people, some high school kids, lots of college kids and recent grads, and these are people who recognize that a year ago, they thought social impact was posting pictures of lasagna on Instagram, and suddenly they realized that the world that our generation had left them was just fundamentally broken. And if they didn't fix it, they and their children didn't have a future. And that's what's been really incredible. And so we had our first major report came out in July called Rise or Fall Together, addressing the emergency needs of the world's most vulnerable populations. And the basic idea, at least in our view of interdependence, is yes, we're all connected, but how do we build a better world? And we do that by recognizing the mutual responsibilities of interdependence. And that if we're interdependent, that means we are all only as safe as the most vulnerable people among us. And so recognizing that interdependence forces us to focus our energies on helping those people. And it's not even help. I mean, the word help, the word charity, they're the wrong words. It's investing in building a stronger and more resilient humanity of which we're a part. So in that July report, we set, and I pushed for this, short-term goal of calling on G20 leaders to guarantee clean water, basic sanitation and hygiene, and essential pandemic protection by 2030 for everybody on Earth. And we launched this major campaign. We did public events. I think we had 700,000 people join our public event, where we had the Indian G20 minister, along with the founder of the World Toilet Organization, and the poorest people in slums in Bangladesh, talking about these issues together. I basically, I don't know a better term for this, I bugged the living shit out of people in G20 foreign ministries. And 3 weeks ago, I was kind of shocked. I was sitting in this exact chair on Sunday night, and I got a WhatsApp message from my contact in the Saudi foreign ministry, who was in one of the leaders of their G20, and Saudi Arabia was the hosts. And they before it had been released, they sent me the G20 leaders' final communique, and he said, "Look at Article 35, and there was the language that we had provided. So we're really excited.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, we're really excited, but it's just a start. And the way that we think about what we're trying to do and wanting to do is something that that traditionally only happens after world wars. In 1648, at the end of the 30 Years' War, the leaders of Europe came together and said, all right, we have all this chaos of all these different overlapping sovereignties. We need to create this model of the modern nation state to get more stability. And it was more stable for a while. But then there was this balance of power model breaking down. And after the Treaty of Vienna in 1815, there was just more and more war. And at the end of 2 world wars in 1945, world leaders recognized that a world of just unfettered competing nation states isn't safe and stable. So we have to do something else. And that's why the UN and those bodies were created. But now what this pandemic has shown us is how deeply we're connected. And it's not that we need to get rid of our essential states. We need to strengthen at least the best parts of them. It's not that we need to get rid of the United Nations. We need more and better United Nations. And one of the reasons why the WHO failed in its response to COVID isn't there something wrong with the WHO. It's that we didn't give it the mandate to have its own global surveillance system, to have investigators who could go anywhere in the world once a tripwire is hit. And that's on us. It's not on them. Yeah. But to build this kind of world, we need a new framework. And just as there was a shift in 1648, and just as there was a shift in 1945, we need a shift now. And the question for all of us is, can we do it through a positive, hopeful movement? Because if we don't, we'll have to do it at some point in the future, because we'll have an ecosystem collapse. Our oceans will stop being able to sustain life. We'll have a nuclear war. There's 1,000 ways that our failure to come together as a species to solve our common problems will kill us unless we come together. And I'll just conclude by linking this to the incredible work that you guys do. Everything that I'm saying, this is about a youth movement. The only way that this happens is if young people make it happen. And for those of us who are in older generations, that doesn't mean we just sit back and cheer for younger people. It means that we are part of this chain crossing generations. We have a huge responsibility to educate, to empower, to embrace, to mentor, to create space for new voices and new kinds of leadership. And nobody knows how to do it. I certainly don't know how to do it. I don't think any of us individually know how to do it. But together, I certainly do think that we've got a shot. So let me, again, thank you for all the great work you're doing, and love to hear your thoughts, and happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Jamie. At Boys to Men, we are, even though we are Boys to Men USA, this particular organization we helped under, when I say we help, I'm talking about Joe Sigurdson and Craig McLean. We have Boys to Men communities throughout Europe, South Africa, India, New Zealand, Australia, obviously Canada, Mexico. I'm just going to bring Joe Sigurdson in here for a minute, our co-founder, and ask him to just remind us about our global reach, and then we can start having a larger conversation about how our youth that we're mentoring can get involved, and how we can support and empower them to take control of our future.
We've always been an open sourced program. This has been a giveaway, and that when we started, we reached out to some guys that were doing this, and one in particular said, no, I'm not going to help you, and if I find out you're using any of my stuff, I'll sue you. And then we knew, well, okay, so from that point forward, we decided that whatever we developed and whatever we discovered, we were going to share openly. And I know that when there was this expansion in 2001 to 2008, and we were flying around the country, we had set up a Google Docs with best practices, and people were taking and innovating and creating new ways to new processes and stuff. So with that, came a global reach, and in large part because of the Mankind Project. We had Mankind Project communities in Germany and in England and in South Africa, and they wanted, they saw what was going on in the United States, and they wanted it. And we had a few guys involved in the program that had connections in Europe and were willing to travel. David Cordes and Stefan Herman were willing to go carry this message across the globe. And you know, I had the privilege of going down to South Africa for the first training, and just, you know, it was pretty ironic that this old white guy was going to Africa to teach rites of passage. That was totally ridiculous, but you know, it was awesome that the embrace and the welcome that we all got. And yeah, so it's an open source program. Whoever wants it, it's accessible. And I know that there are boys to men communities in the United States that we don't know about because they've just downloaded our stuff and done it themselves. And so
thank you, Jay.
That's how.
Yeah. So Jamie, we're going to have some questions from the group here. I do just want to point out that, you know, one of the things that we've noticed in our work is it is the disempowerment of youth, and oftentimes the competition of adults with younger people, an oppression, so to speak. We've actually had a multicultural training about classism and youthism and ageism yesterday. And so shifting the responsibility of adults, of in particular our elders, our uncles, our aunts, and to reach out and to essentially empower young people to listen to them at early stages, like from middle school forward, because it takes the struggles of youth to initiate a new way of being at a planetary level. I'm just curious, what could you see as a possibility of a way that we could collaborate with OneShared.World as Boys to Men International?
Yeah, so great question, and two parts. One, definitely I agree with what you said about creating space for different voices, and it's a balance. It's an art, because you know, I see on Joe's shirt has the word mentoring, and in mentoring it tends to be that the more experienced person mentors the less experienced, and you're transferring that knowledge. So that I think we can't pretend that there aren't those kinds of differences, but what we can say is, well, how do we pass on how do we pass on wisdom while creating empowerment and empowering younger generations? And certainly at OneShared.World, that's been a focus of what we've done. In part, I'll be honest, just by absolute necessity. I mean, we're the startup organization. We have all these amazing young people. If we didn't totally empower them and make them feel that they have and agency and make that agency real, like we wouldn't have been able to do anything. I think that's probably the case with the world. So there's definitely that kind of balance between mentoring, which is so essentially important. And we find it with our organization, as empowered as these young college kids are, there's just things that we know because we've been around longer, and not providing those wouldn't help anybody. So in terms of how we might collaborate, I mean, really the sky is the limit. We're opening OneShared.World chapters all around the world, and in colleges and universities. I could imagine collaborating on that. I could imagine sharing resources. I love what Joe said about being open source. I mean, we are open source as well. So all of our content, certainly our Declaration of Interdependence, which has now been translated into 19 languages. We could do dialogues on what interdependence means. We'd love to benefit from your not just mentoring materials, but mentors. Maybe we could have virtual relationships, mentors, cross-cultural. I love that Joe went back to South Africa, because it's return to the source. You know, our ancestors all used to live in South Africa, and then they left. So it's nice for us to go back and visit from time to time, and maybe we learn something while we've been away.
Fantastic. Following up on the collaboration aspect, I'm going to ask Parth Savla out of NorCal. He has a question for you.
Hi, Jamie. First of all, thank you so much for being here and just for all of your insight. Quick question, just around the mobilization of next generation youth.
You're welcome.
How do you like? Can you share a little bit about your process of how you reached out to them? How did you mobilize them? Of course, there's a creating the environment, but also what tools and resources did you use to actually kind of appeal to their sensitivity?
Right. Yeah.
Share a little bit.
So first there was, how do we find them? And so it was very important for us that we clearly articulated who we are and what we stand for. And that was why it certainly was useful that we started out with our Declaration of Interdependence. So kind of our principles were out there. And then originally it was just people through, like with a lot of these things, it was degrees of separation from me in the beginning, friends, kids, but then it in a matter of very short number of weeks, that started to grow and people started recruiting friends and others. And the numbers of young people who were volunteering started to balloon. And then we did something that I think was the key to everything, is we had a meeting of all the young people and we said, look, we want this to be a flat organization. That doesn't mean that everyone does the same things. That doesn't mean that different people don't have different skills and backgrounds and age and wisdom. I put in the category of a skill and a background. But how would you like to be organized? And so we had a long conversation about that. And one of the first things they said is, well, we don't want to be called, we're volunteering. We don't want to be called interns. And I said, well, what do you want to be called? And they said, we want to be called coordinators, which I thought was nice because they were recognizing that what they were bringing was energy. That there were some things they just didn't know, and they were honest about that. We empowered them to organize themselves in connection with us. So identified leaders, built out structures. The young people themselves created a whole integration, a recruitment process, an integration process. And then we said, well, what are the skills that you want in order to do what you're doing? So for example, in their recruitment and onboarding, they said what they wanted. I said, all right, well, we have a member of our team who's the lead headhunter for Russell Reynolds, which is one of the biggest search firms in the not-for-profit world. And so she's volunteering and she'll do a training session with you on how to think about it. And so that was certainly letting them lead has been really, really important. And then creating enough flexibility, especially for not-for-profit groups where it's all volunteer. You kind of want to get enough of people's engagement to be meaningful, but have it be flexible enough so that in these moments when life gets busier, like at the end of the summer or whatever, they don't have a binary decision of staying with you or going back to school. So those are just some kind of basic principles, but nothing is too exciting. But I think it's empowerment and listening. And then course correction is also really important. I mean, I'll just say that early on in our journey, BLM happened. And the young people were really, like everybody, was really agitated. And they wanted basically the whole organization to stop and the whole organization to pivot toward BLM issues. And it was a tough one for me because I felt, well, I'm highly sympathetic to BLM, but there are a lot of big global issues. I mean, there are 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in China. There are places in Africa where one group of Black people had a genocide against another group of Black people. What does BLM mean in that context? And I was trying to say, well, let's keep our global focus, but recognize that there are lots of cases like this one where we see something wrong and we need to speak openly about it. And these young people said, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. That sounds like all lives matter. We're having this moment on this issue in this place, And we're about half Americans are young people. We want to stop everything and focus on this. And that's what we did. That's what we did. It was hard to stop, but we did. And I think it was the right answer. Yeah, I imagine when you reach out across the globe that there's so many different folks that come together with their own agendas, their own causes. And of course, the OneShared.World platform is a place to try to bring global attention to it. Alex Rounds has a question about the global shadow. Alex, if you could ask your question to Dr. Metzl.
Okay, let me.
You're unmuted.
Yep.
Now you're muted again.
Yep.
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Alex.
Yeah.
There we go. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Alex. One more time. We'll try our favorite Zoom.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Your positive, hopeful spirit inspires me, and I'm thrilled almost as much as I was by Greta Thurban. Is
Thunberg, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And just, the power of one voice in her youth. And we have a shadow side to us, as you mentioned, with everything that's going on. And I wonder how we can bring in some psychological depth into the conversation. I'm aware of Dr. James Hollis, a Jungian psychologist who's well regarded. He's I just wonder if you're bringing things like that into the conversation. In Robert Blyer's Iron John book, he talks about pre-Christian towns that had their ritual to expel the shadow from the village, someone playing the devil and driving them out of the village. It seems like we need to at least get people to engage in the conversation of the shadow. Thanks. What do you think of that? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly understanding psychology is the key to all of this stuff, because with all of our technology and all of our growth, we are animals. We are, a part of the hominids or hominins standing on 2 feet. And certainly there's parts of our brains that are unique to humans, but the majority of our brains and our instincts are similar to lots of other animals. And I think that we need to be honest about that. And that was why when I mentioned 2020 being similar to 1918, I think that's what I meant. At any moment, we have what you call the shadow. There's lots of names for it. And we have the opportunity to be better. We have a range of possibility, and there's malleability in what we can be, but it takes communities. I mean, culture is probably the most important form of inheritance. If you drop a human baby just into some other environment without the culture, without the teaching, without the mentoring, community, history, we would be much more similar. That person wouldn't just on their own come up with 5,000 years of ethics. They would be much more like our ancestors were, and more instinct driven. And that's why all of these issues of culture and infrastructure and education and values are just so essential, because that piece of us is always here. And as Michael and Richie and Tony and Luz know, I myself am the son of a refugee. My father and grandparents came to the United States fleeing Nazism actually after the war. And there you saw all these perfectly well-educated people committing just horrendous crimes. And so that it's not that Germans are necessarily worse than anybody else. We all have that potential. And the challenge for us and the opportunity for us is, how do we build structures that inspire us to be our best, while recognizing, as you were saying, Alex, that worst version of us is part of all of us.
Thank you, Jamie. We have another question from Jeff Parrott. Jeff, please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thanks. Hi, Jamie. I really appreciate the conversation you're having. I think you're spot on in terms of we are in this tremendous time of social change. I think we come out the other side of this. We don't know what government, what education, what economics will look like. It's a completely new paradigm. And so I have really two questions. One's kind of an inquiry and the other one's a question. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Yes.
We posted some links in the chat window and what he's doing with his War on Sense Making and the Consilience Project. And then the second question I have for you is a broader, deeper question, which is anyone looking at the role that money is playing in this? Because I think when you dig down to the roots of all of these issues, it comes to the way money works and how it's playing out in society right now.
Yeah, two great questions. I personally know Daniel, and I'm a fan of his work. He's probably a little more dry than I am, less emotional as a speaker. So I don't know everything about the two projects that you've described, but I think Daniel is a really kind of scary, smart analyst, and so I will look at those and learn more and maybe circle back. And then the second question on the role of money, yeah, I mean and money and really inequality, and both of them are kind of proxies for this issue of potential. And right now, when we see just in the United States and around the world, this explosion of inequality one where we have some people are so much more super empowered than everybody else that they have more voice and more opportunity and everything else. And then huge numbers of people, billions of people who just don't have a shot, whoever they are, they don't even have a shot of contributing. And if you don't think about the world in the frame of interdependence, then you think, well, too bad for those people. Or maybe you're a really nice person and you think, well, we should do some charity to help them out because when I hear about it, it makes me feel sad. And why not? I'll feel better if those people aren't in such dire straits. But if we recognize our interdependence, then we'll say, wait a second, those people are me. Like my future resides in those people. And we can see it in all sorts of ways. I mean, one is the virus itself. If the virus grows and spreads among the world's most vulnerable populations and mutates and then comes back, then we're all in trouble. And so this is why with our WashPAP, Water Sanitation Hygiene Pandemic Protection campaign is as it is. Isn't it just a smarter thing to say, well, let's invest in these other people and then we'll have a safer world for everybody. But then when you look at what are the things that are kind of saving our lives and improving our lives? Well, maybe you think technology is, and you look at the number of people in Silicon Valley who are immigrants, it's huge. Or maybe you're excited about the mRNA vaccine and you recognize this Turkish-German couple who developed it, or my friend, the Armenian born investor in Boston who helped found Moderna. And then you think, well, of these billions of people who are living in abject poverty without access to the basic ingredients of life, how many innovations that we can't imagine are we losing because we don't have those people able to join us? How many people are dying of diseases that could be cured? How many people aren't reading beautiful poems that these people could read, problems that they could be solved? And that's why I think that once we internalize this interdependence theme, I hope it forces us to think a little bit differently about the distribution of opportunity. And I think money is a proxy for that.
Yeah, interdependence. Thank you, Jeff. Interdependence is at the root of what we do at Boys to Men. Our understanding of that, that our our most at-risk youth are going to be the leaders, or the ones that can transform our future. They are definitely the ones. I'm going to ask T. Greg Squires to please ask his question. He's our program chair at Boys to Men USA. T. Greg.
And his cat is on the couch. Right.
I want to hear what it took from you to really walk the talk of saying, I'm going to let the youth lead. I want to hear that personal journey.
Well, Greg, it's such an important question, because you've asked for a personal thing. I'll give you my personal answer. It was devastating. It was so hard because I had this vision. We'd moved so quickly. I mean, I said it was 35 days from the first Zoom call to launching this global organization. Everything was moving so quickly. And then all of a sudden, and it was global. And then all of a sudden, this thing happens in the United States. And I was saying, well, let's think of this in the context of the whole. And I still believe that's the right answer. And yet it didn't work. And I at first gently tried to say it, and that didn't work. And it was really hard, and especially as the founder, and we have a pretty flat organization, but I have kind of the role that I have. And in the beginning, I thought, well, this is the wrong answer. Let's move toward the right answer, which is there's a principle here. Let's establish the principle and then say this principle applies in these specific circumstances, and we haven't fully established the principle, so let's keep going. But it wasn't happening. Like the message that I was receiving, if I said we are an organization where the young people are empowered, and they told me something that I didn't even fully agree with, and I pushed back, and they said, no, this is what we mean. It was a moment of truth. And so it wasn't easy. It was hard. I felt down about it, but now looking back, it was so the right answer, because had I said, no, you're wrong, here's where we're going, just trust me on this, it would have destroyed the whole organization. And so that's, I think you really hit it with your question. The easiest thing in the world is to say, well, everybody's empowered, bring your best self, tell me what you want, and whatever. The hardest thing is to really listen and change something, even something that may feel sacred to you. And that doesn't mean we should all be chameleons, but it means that this is hard work.
And kudos to you for doing that, because that is the work that we do with our youth.
My question for you, Jamie, is how do we transcend that global fear, and how do we create the opportunity for us to step into a brighter future?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I think a lot of us took a certain trajectory of the world for granted. I don't think 6 years ago, many of us would have predicted just this massive and very rapid rise in a toxic form of us-them nationalism, certainly spread across the United States. And so I don't know if there's any one answer other than we need to fight for it. That I definitely think that we kind of all became a little bit complacent, that globally the United States was playing a certain role in the world. We have a pretty well-functioned society and a democracy that wasn't perfect, but it was delivering. And then all of a sudden we realized that our culture, our democracy, our society was like a fragile plant. It wasn't like some kind of like a rock that you can do whatever you want. It's still there. It was this very fragile plant, and that we each had a role in nurturing it. And if we didn't, that it just wasn't going to exist. So I think that's why groups like this are so important, because there's the line between on an individual level, on a communal level, on a national, on a global level, the line separating, and this is connected to Alex's question, the line separating the two outcomes it's a very, very thin line. And humans, we're social animals that don't fully recognize how contextual our lives are. And so we just take actions that seem perfectly rational, but we don't realize that the environment around us is changing. And so the rational act in the world that we live in, and even connected to the question about maximizing wealth. It just seems like a good idea to just get as much money as you can, because all kinds of good things happen to you. People seem to be nicer to you, and whatever. And if we don't question the parameters, and if we don't nurture our lives and the people around us through the kind of mentoring that you do and so many other ways, then little by little, in these imperceptible ways, we're going to lose. And the alternative is true. If we do that, little by little, we build a better world. We don't see it every day. We just kind of have a feeling that we're doing our bit. And if enough of us do our bit, and we're smart about it and strategic about it, and then I think that there's certainly a lot of hope.
Emotional intelligence in kids leading the way into the future.
Yeah, I think it's just essential that however fancy our science, we are emotional beings. We are biological beings with potentials, and we have potentials to be better and potentials to be worse. And I don't go so far, and maybe I'm caricaturizing. You said that things were so great in the kind of the pre-agricultural ages, because we know our ancestors probably wiped out the Neanderthals and did all sorts of nasty things. But I certainly think that we have these potentials, and that certainly we have become much more hierarchical. That the agrarian societies are more hierarchical, and that's allowed them to do certain things. And so we need to recognize that the agrarian cultures over time have kind of massively outdeveloped and outcompeted the people who are living more similarly to our ancestors. But it's come at a real cost. And I think that's the challenge for us, is to say, how can we have the best of everything? And how can we connect to things that maybe we already know because they are part of us, but not all of us. And my guess is half of the people on this call have at some point gone on one of these very popular diets, which are eat like your ancestors ate, because it turned out that our bodies aren't that well set up for margarine and cotton candy and all the other, and sugar and processed flour. But for a long time, we've adapted to diets kind of like our ancestors. And there's a lot that our ancestors knew that we've lost. And I think that the challenge for us is, how do we find that kind of balance? How do we find that kind of wisdom? And as I said before, our greatest form of inheritance is cultural inheritance. And the good news is we've got a lot of wisdom that's laying around. And so maybe some stuff we need to reinvent, and other stuff we need to find where in our history, or maybe where even today in some other part of the world, they're doing it really well. My guess is with mentoring, with everything, we can look just like with healthcare. Look at a country like Norway or Estonia. I mean, say, well, geez, they're doing it pretty well. What can we learn from them? And I think that, and again, maybe I'll end where I began. That's why these kinds of communities, crossing borders and bringing people together around sharing and growing, are so important.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Dr. Jamie Metzl. The organization is called OneShared.World, and it's basically OneShared.World. So the domain is .world. Well, thank you, Jamie. And a reminder that Jamie's bestseller, Hacking Darwin, is available both as a digital book as well as a hard copy. So please check it out. I've read it twice. I learn something new every time.
Wow.
Thank you, Dr. Jamie Metzl, for your amazing participation, your insights. Blessings to you.
Thank you so much. And what I'll just say is, I hope that you don't keep learning from reading my book over and over and over, because that'll be a bad sign. But anyway, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to keeping in touch with everybody.